In the hallowed halls of modern virtue, empathy sits enthroned, a radiant and unquestioned deity. We are taught to worship at its altar, to believe that feeling another's pain is the highest form of human connection, the very bedrock of goodness. It is a sweet and intoxicating song, this siren call to dissolve our boundaries and merge with the suffering of others. It promises a world without sharp edges, a collective soul where no one is truly alone in their sorrow. But what if this sacred virtue is not a window to truth, but a gilded cage? What if the light it casts is not one of clarity, but of a soft, seductive fog that obscures the very nature of reality? This is the unnerving question that Friedrich Nietzsche hurls into the heart of our most cherished beliefs. He saw in the glorification of empathy not a strength, but a subtle poison, a tranquilizer for the soul that weakens the will and clouds the judgment. Nietzsche, the philosopher of the hammer, was ever suspicious of what he termed herd morality, the system of values created not by the strong, but by the weak, to protect themselves from the strong. Empathy, in this bleak calculus, becomes the ultimate tool of domestication. It is the invisible leash by which the powerful are tamed, their instincts for dominance and self-overcoming diluted by the incessant demand to feel for the other. Compassion, he argued, becomes a weaponized virtue, forcing the noble spirit to kneel, to feel guilt for its own strength, and to divert its energy away from creation and towards preservation of the frail. It is a morality born of fear, a pact of mutual mediocrity that ensures no one rises too high, lest they cast a shadow on those below. The herd bleats in unison about the sanctity of shared feeling, but what they truly desire is conformity, a world leveled down to the lowest common denominator of suffering. Herein lies the brutal tension, the unforgiving chasm between compassion and clear perception. To truly feel with another is to step into their perspective, to adopt their emotional lens. But in that act of merging, one's own vision is compromised. You begin to see the world not as it is, but as it is filtered through another's pain, another's weakness, another's resentment. The truth, in Nietzsche's view, is often cold, hard, and indifferent. It does not care for our feelings. Life itself is a relentless striving, a chaotic and beautiful struggle for power and growth. Empathy, with its gentle, insistent whisper, urges us to turn away from this harsh reality. It offers a comforting illusion, a moral anesthetic that numbs us to the terrible and magnificent truths of existence. It asks us to choose feeling good over seeing clearly, to sacrifice the sharp, painful clarity of truth for the warm, blurry embrace of shared sentiment. The seduction is powerful, for it promises belonging and righteousness. But the price is vision itself. What is this goodness we are all compelled to chase? Nietzsche tears at the very fabric of this concept, exposing the threads of fear and weakness from which it is woven. He saw modern morality not as a divine commandment or a rational absolute, but as a historical construct, a psychological weapon forged in the fires of resentment. This is the morality of the herd, a system designed by the historically oppressed, the slaves, the timid, and the unremarkable, to pass judgment on their masters. It is a revaluation of all values where the attributes of the powerful, pride, ambition, strength, and a certain noble ruthlessness, are recast as evil. In their place, the qualities of the herd, humility, obedience, and above all pity, are sanctified and elevated as good. This is not a path to enlightenment. It is a grand, collective illusion, a survival strategy masquerading as virtue. Empathy is the lifeblood of this illusion. It is the mechanism by which the herd enforces its values and ensures its own perpetuation. To belong, you must feel as the herd feels. You must attune your emotional frequency to the collective vibration of pity and shared vulnerability. Truth, in this paradigm, becomes a dangerous liability. An individual who sees the world too clearly, who points out the weakness inherent in this pity-based morality, is a threat to the stability of the group. They are the outsider, the heretic, the evil, one who refuses to participate in the comforting charade. Conformity becomes the highest good, and empathy is its enforcer. It is a silent, velvet-gloved tyrant that demands you sacrifice your intellectual honesty for the sake of social cohesion. The question is no longer what is true, but what feels right to us. This leads to a profound and terrifying inversion. Goodness becomes synonymous with weakness. The inability to exact revenge becomes forgiveness. Timidity is rebranded as patience. The incapacity for greatness is called humility. The herd celebrates not the soaring eagle, but the patient sheep, not for any inherent nobility, but because the sheep is harmless, predictable, and poses no threat. This is a morality that champions the preservation of life at any cost, even at the cost of life's meaning, its vitality, its potential for greatness. It is a philosophy of exhaustion, a quiet declaration of bankruptcy of the will. Nietzsche saw this as the great danger of his time, and ours. The illusion of goodness, fueled by an indiscriminate empathy, was creating a flattened human landscape, a world of last men who blink in contentment, seeking only comfort and an absence of pain, utterly blind to the higher possibilities of the human spirit. There is a subtle but venomous distinction Nietzsche makes: the line between empathy and pity. While empathy may claim to be a noble sharing of feeling, he saw it most often manifest as mitleid, pity, or suffering with. This is not an act of strength, but a contagion of misery. When you pity someone, you do not elevate them. You climb down into their abyss and suffer alongside them. You validate their weakness, you affirm their victimhood, and in doing so, you participate in the multiplication of suffering across the world. Pity does not heal, it spreads the sickness. It is a morbid indulgence, a way of feeling connected through shared decay rather than shared strength. It is the opposite of the life-affirming will that Nietzsche championed. True help, he might argue, would be to offer a hammer to help them shatter their own chains, not to sit and weep with them in their cell. This constant emotional identification, this practice of absorbing the sorrows of the world, is a profound act of self-erosion. It is a spiritual bleeding that drains one's own resilience, one's own vital force. Imagine a soul as a vessel of finite energy. Every act of pity is a crack in that vessel, allowing your own will, your own joy, your own power to seep out into the bottomless ocean of universal suffering. You become a sponge for external misery, heavy and saturated, no longer capable of your own ascent. Nietzsche believed the noble soul must be hard, not in the sense of being cruel, but in the sense of being resilient, self-contained, and capable of preserving its own strength in the face of another's despair. To be constantly swayed by the winds of others' emotions is to have no anchor, no center of gravity. It is to surrender your own psychic territory, to become a colony of other people's pain. The deepest horror of pity, for Nietzsche, is that it is fundamentally condescending and ultimately life-denying. By pitying someone, you implicitly label them as helpless, as a pathetic object incapable of overcoming their own fate. You strip them of their agency and their potential for growth through struggle. Suffering, in the Nietzschean cosmos, is not something to be eliminated at all costs. It is an indispensable catalyst for strength, a forge in which the will is tempered. Pity seeks to soothe this sacred fire, to wrap the struggling soul in a damp blanket of commiseration, thereby robbing it of its chance for transformation. It is a misguided kindness that ultimately weakens both the giver and the receiver. It is a shared pact to remain in the depths, a conspiracy against the arduous, painful, but ultimately glorious act of overcoming. Pity does not say, "I see your struggle, now rise." It whispers, "Your suffering is too great. Stay here, with me, in the dark." Beneath the shimmering surface of altruism, behind the gentle facade of compassion, Nietzsche smelled decay. He understood that human psychology is a labyrinth of hidden drives and subterranean motives. Empathy, in this dark theater, often plays the role of a beautiful, smiling mask. It is the costume we wear to appear good, both to others and, more importantly, to ourselves. We perform compassion. We signal our virtue by feeling the correct emotions. But what lurks beneath this performance? Too often, he suspected, it is not a pure and selfless love for humanity, but a tangled knot of darker impulses. The desire for social approval, the need to feel superior to the one being pitied, or the subtle, insidious pleasure derived from witnessing another's misfortune from a position of safety. Empathy becomes a moral currency used to purchase a good reputation. This is where Nietzsche's analysis becomes most corrosive. He proposed that morality itself is not a quest for truth, but a vehicle for the will to power. Different moralities serve different forms of power. The morality of the strong, the master morality, values power openly. It is creative, assertive, and self-affirming. But the slave morality, born of the herd, is more cunning. It must disguise its will to power because it lacks the strength to assert it directly. So, it wields empathy and pity as its weapons. By championing compassion, it condemns the powerful, shames the self-reliant, and subtly gains control over them through guilt. You are strong, therefore you are evil. You must atone by serving us, the weak. Empathy, in this light, is not a bridge between souls. It is a strategic tool of manipulation, a form of psychic warfare waged by the collectively weak against the individually strong. Think of it as a grand, theatrical production. The empath is the star actor, weeping on cue, their face a perfect portrait of shared sorrow. The audience, society, applauds their performance, showering them with accolades for their profound goodness. But backstage, in the shadows of the psyche, the true motives are at play. The act of feeling for others can be a profound act of self-aggrandizement. It is a way to position oneself as the benevolent, the caring, the morally righteous one. It is a drama where the suffering of others becomes a mere prop for our own moral vanity. This is the ultimate deception. Empathy not as a selfless act, but as a deeply selfish one, a mask of morality that hides a hollow core, or worse, a hunger for power that dares not speak its own name. The kindest smile can hide the sharpest teeth. To live with unbounded empathy is to live in a state of perpetual bondage. It is to offer up your own nervous system as a public utility, a switchboard for every distress signal in your vicinity. Every sorrowful story, every cry for help, every glimpse of suffering becomes a demand on your psychic resources. Nietzsche saw this not as a noble sacrifice, but as a form of self-annihilation. You become a slave to the suffering of others. Your own life, your own goals, your own will perpetually deferred and fragmented by the endless onslaught of external claims. Your energy is no longer your own to direct towards growth and creation. It is siphoned off, piece by piece, to appease the bottomless pit of the world's pain. This is the tyranny of compassion, an emotional enslavement disguised as virtue. Nietzsche's warning is stark and terrifying. In your rush to feel for the weak, you sacrifice your will to them. The collective weight of their needs, their fears, and their resentments becomes the gravity that holds you down. They do not need to use physical chains when emotional ones will suffice. This is a form of blackmail that operates under the guise of morality. If you do not feel my pain, the silent accusation goes, you are cruel, you are heartless, you are evil. The empath, desperate to maintain their self-image as a good person, capitulates. They surrender their time, their strength, their very soul, not out of a genuine, life-affirming love, but out of a fear of moral condemnation. They become governed by the pain of others, their life's trajectory dictated not by their own inner compass, but by the endless demands of the emotionally indebted. This is a quiet, creeping form of despotism. There is no single tyrant on a throne, only a million tiny tyrants of pain, each pulling on a thread of your being. The result is a profound paralysis of the will. How can you pursue your own great project, climb your own mountain, when you are constantly being called back down to the valley to tend to every scraped knee and bruised ego? The Übermensch, Nietzsche's ideal of the self-overcoming human, would be impossible in such a state. The Übermensch must be the master of their own values, the composer of their own life's symphony. This requires a formidable degree of self-possession and a ruthless prioritization of one's own will. To be enslaved by the pain of others is the antithesis of this ideal. It is to let the discordant noise of the world drown out your own inner music, to become an echo instead of a voice. To see the world as it truly is, in all its terror, its beauty, its magnificent indifference, one must first learn the art of emotional distance. Sympathy, that comforting impulse to suffer with, is a distorting lens. It softens the hard edges of reality. It colors the stark monochrome of existence with the warm, deceptive hues of our own feelings. It insists on finding a human-centric meaning, a moral narrative, in the cold, silent machinery of the cosmos. Nietzsche's philosophy is a demand for a more courageous form of perception, a ruthless seeing that strips away these layers of sentimental illusion. It is the courage to look into the abyss of life without demanding that the abyss feel sorry for you. This requires stepping beyond the warm circle of sympathy into the cold, clear, and often lonely light of unvarnished truth. Truth, for Nietzsche, is not a gentle comfort. It is a brutal tonic. Life is struggle, growth is painful, and the universe does not operate according to our moral preferences. The lion devouring the gazelle is not evil. The earthquake that shatters a city is not a moral failing. These are simply expressions of power, of the relentless, amoral will to life that animates all things. Empathy recoils from this vision. It seeks to domesticate this wild reality, to judge it, to wrap it in narratives of justice and injustice, victimhood and villainy. It whispers that the world should be otherwise, that suffering is an anomaly to be eradicated. Nietzsche argues the opposite. Suffering is fundamental, a necessary component of all greatness. To try and see the world without suffering is to wish the world were not itself. It is the ultimate distortion. This is not a call for cruelty, but for a higher form of honesty. It is the recognition that seeing clearly is a prerequisite for any meaningful action. A surgeon cannot operate effectively if they are overcome with sympathy for the patient's pain. They need detachment, precision, and a cold, clear focus on the reality of the body before them. The philosopher, the artist, the creator, the true physician of culture, must possess a similar detachment. They must be able to diagnose the sickness of their age without succumbing to it. They must be willing to see the ugliness, the decay, and the weakness without being paralyzed by pity. To see beyond sympathy is to accept the world in its totality, the terrible with the sublime. It is only from this vantage point of clear, unsentimental vision that one can truly begin to affirm life, not as we wish it were, but as it is. In a world that leonizes emotional connection, detachment is often mistaken for its monstrous cousins: cruelty, apathy, and indifference. But for Nietzsche, this is a profound misunderstanding. The detachment he speaks of is not a deficiency of feeling, but a mastery of it. It is not the coldness of a void, but the focused coolness of a tempered blade. It is the discipline required to stand firm amidst the storm of external emotions, to observe the chaos without being consumed by it. This is not cruelty. It is the genesis of true strength. The individual who is perpetually porous to the feelings of others is not strong. They are unstable, a ship without a rudder, tossed about by every passing emotional wave. Strength is born in the act of drawing a boundary around the soul, of preserving one's own psychic integrity. This discipline is a central requirement for Nietzsche's ideal, the Übermensch. The Übermensch is the self-surpassing human, the one who creates their own values and lives in accordance with their own will to power. This monumental task of self-creation is impossible if one is constantly indentured to the emotional states of others. To overcome the self, one must first possess a self. Over-identification with the suffering of the herd is the surest way to dissolve this self, to melt it down into the collective pot of mediocrity. The Übermensch must cultivate a pathos of distance, an inner loftiness that allows them to look upon the world, with all its pity parties and moral dramas, from a higher, more panoramic perspective. This distance provides the clarity necessary to judge, to act, and to create, free from the distorting influence of herd sentiment. Therefore, empathy without boundaries is the very definition of weakness. It is a psychological hemorrhage. Detachment, conversely, is what sharpens the vision and fortifies the will. It allows for a love that is not born of pity or need, but of admiration for strength. It allows for an action that is not a reactive spasm of sympathy, but a deliberate, strategic choice aimed at fostering genuine growth, even if that growth requires painful, difficult truths. The detached individual can see the forest for the trees. They can diagnose the root cause of suffering rather than merely applying sentimental bandages to its symptoms. This strength is not about refusing to feel, but about refusing to be governed by feeling. It is the profound and quiet power of the wanderer on the mountaintop, who can see the burning city below, understand its tragedy, but not be so consumed by the smoke that they lose sight of the stars above. It is a grave mistake to read Nietzsche's critique of pity as a wholesale rejection of love. To do so is to fall into the very simplistic, binary morality he so despised. Nietzsche did not condemn love itself. He condemned the weak, cloying, possessive, and pity-based form of love that he saw masquerading as the real thing. He scorned the love that blinds, the love that seeks to possess and diminish, the love that arises from a place of lack and neediness. This is the love of the herd, a desperate clinging together for warmth against the cold, a pact of mutual limitation. It is a love that says, "I need you because I am incomplete without you," and in doing so, it drains the vitality from both parties. True, noble love, in the Nietzschean sense, would be something far more rare and formidable. It would be a love between two strong, self-sufficient individuals, a love that is not a refuge from the world, but a shared celebration of it. This is a love with eyes wide open, one that sees the other not through the distorting filter of romantic illusion or pity, but in all their flawed, striving, and terrible glory, and affirms them nonetheless. It is a love that does not seek to comfort and protect, but to challenge and inspire. It is two sovereign powers meeting not to merge and disappear into one another, but to stand side by side, each sharpening the other, each spurring the other on to their own personal ascent. This is not about finding your other half, but about two whole individuals choosing to share a path. This higher love requires empathy to be tempered with the cold steel of clarity. It requires the ability to see your beloved's weaknesses without pitying them, to understand their pain without being consumed by it, and to recognize their flaws without needing to fix them. An authentic connection is forged not in a shared illusion, but in a shared recognition of reality. It is a bond strong enough to withstand the harsh light of truth. This love does not say, "Let us hide from the world together." It says, "The world is a terrifying and magnificent chaos. Let us face it, each in our own strength, but with the profound respect and admiration of the other." It is not a denial of feeling, but an elevation of it, a love that serves the will to power, that enhances life rather than diminishes it. Deeper still into the labyrinth of the human heart, Nietzsche uncovers a yet more sinister motive lurking behind the mask of empathy: narcissism. The act of feeling for others can be the ultimate act of self-love, a drama staged not for the benefit of the sufferer, but for the glorification of the empath. When people proclaim their compassion from the rooftops, when they make a public spectacle of their sensitivity, are they truly concerned with the object of their pity? Or is the suffering of others merely a dark mirror in which they can admire their own beautiful, virtuous reflection? This is the shadow of false compassion, a deep, self-serving hypocrisy that feeds on the pain of others to nourish its own ego. It is the performance of goodness as a tool for self-admiration. Nietzsche's suspicion of any morality rooted in pity is grounded in this psychological insight. He saw how the language of compassion could be used to accumulate moral capital. The person who feels the most is crowned the most righteous. It becomes a subtle competition of sensitivity, a race to see who can be the most publicly heartbroken by the world's injustices. In this theater of virtue, the actual victims become secondary characters in a play that is really all about the moral purity of the audience. The empath, in this dark reading, is not a healer. They are a connoisseur of tragedy, a collector of sad stories that serve to decorate their own sense of self. They do not seek to end suffering, because without suffering, their role as the compassionate one would cease to exist. This breeds a profound and poisonous hypocrisy. It is the preacher who speaks of love and humility while secretly craving power and adoration. It is the activist who claims to fight for the oppressed, but is truly fueled by a resentful hatred of the powerful. It is the friend who offers a shoulder to cry on, all the while taking a quiet, morbid satisfaction in their friend's misfortune, for it confirms their own superior stability. False compassion is an emotional parasite. It offers a rose, but the rose is tainted, dripping with the blood of a secret contempt. It is a love for humanity that is, at its core, a hatred of human strength and a fetishization of weakness, all in service of propping up a fragile, insecure ego. It is the most decadent form of the will to power, one that must feed on the decay of others to feel alive. In the final, shattering crescendo of his thought, Nietzsche leaves us with a stark and unforgiving choice. It is not a choice between empathy and cruelty, but between illusion and truth. His ultimate lesson is not to eradicate empathy, but to subjugate it. Empathy, with all its warmth and seductive power, must be the servant of truth, never its master. When feeling clouds judgment, when compassion obstructs perception, it must be ruthlessly set aside. The highest virtue is not to feel good, but to see clearly. And this clarity requires a courage that few possess. The courage to look upon life in its unvarnished, amoral, and often terrifying reality, and to affirm it nonetheless. This is the ultimate test of a spirit's strength. Only those who are strong enough to withstand the cold winds of reality, who do not need the huddling warmth of shared illusions, can truly see. The weak, the herd, will always choose the comforting lie over the brutal truth. They will construct moral systems and champion virtues like pity precisely to shield themselves from the harshness of existence. They use empathy as a blindfold, a pact to agree that the world is other than it is. To tear off that blindfold is a solitary and often painful act. It is to accept that the universe is indifferent to your sorrow, that strength and weakness are not moral categories, and that life's meaning is not something to be found, but something to be created, forged in the fires of a sovereign will. This is the final, terrifying, and exhilarating call to arms. It is a summons to rise above the swamp of sentimentalism, to ascend beyond the thick, emotional fog of empathy's illusions. It is a demand that you become the master of your own perceptions, that you cultivate the strength to stare into the abyss without flinching, and to find in that abyss not a reason for despair, but the raw material for creation. The path is not one of comfort. It leads away from the safety of the herd and into the lonely wilderness of self-reliance. It asks everything of you. And so, the final challenge hangs in the silence, a quiet, piercing question directed not at the world, but at you. Are you willing to pay the price of vision? Are you courageous enough to see the truth, even if it means standing and seeing alone?